Welcome back to another episode of So You Want to Be in Ministry. I'm Tim, glad to have you back again. We exist simply to get you to the finish line that God has put in front of you. We do that through encouraging you, educating you, and equipping you. And so no matter what may have brought you here, I hope you get a little bit of that, whether you're a pastor, whether you're on a ministry staff, whether you're thinking about jumping into that area of life, or whether you're just here to figure out how to continue to support your church staff. I'm glad you found us. Today, we have a treat. We are interviewing Joe Lawson. He is a local associational, so denominational minister. He's with the Rehoboth Baptist Association in Illinois. He is the pastor to me as a pastor. So he's the pastor to pastors. I'm one of those pastors that he connects with and cares for. He does a great job with it. But one thing that I've seen with him in my time here in this community is the fact that he has basically become the pastor to our entire rural community. Like, he cares about our community, and our community knows they can call him. So like, if they don't have a pastor or they just need somebody that can care for them in a pastoral way, they call Joe. And so he has a lot of wisdom on that. He's been very faithful for a very long time in this community within different roles. And so I'm going to let you hear from him. Looking forward to it. And let's get into this interview. Well, hey, Joe, really glad to have you on the podcast today. I try to introduce everybody, and I'll do that in my intro. But one thing that has stood out for me in regards to you is I've been a campus pastor here in our area for almost 7 years now, and pretty consistently, I've seen our community respond to you as kind of their pastor, the community pastor. So like if somebody is needing somebody to do a funeral or a wedding, and maybe for whatever reason their pastor can't, or they may not have a pastor at that moment, they naturally call you, and you naturally just step in and do it. And it's been pretty amazing to see that as a pastor in our community. And I've just come to expect that that's going to happen even within individuals within my own campus. And I kind of think it's fun at this point to see who's going to end up calling you. It's kind of a fun thing for me. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about is with all of that, like, what was your story in getting into ministry? And then as we go beyond that, like, how did that happen? How did you kind of become the community pastor? So let's start with your story. How'd you end up in ministry?
Well, ministry entry came later in life, in my 30s, not too late, I guess, but grew up in a Christian home, going to church, and had since God called us some type of ministry as a teenager, and yet it was nonspecific. Didn't really clarify what I needed to do, so I just kept following my path of becoming a livestock and grain farmer, having grown up on a farm and fed the pigs and hung out in the cornfields, and I was pretty happy with all that, pretty content. So just kind of had my crisis with God in the early 80s.
All right.
Just a series of events happened with my first wife's health, and thought it was going to be really serious. It ended up not to be. She had a friend that attended Golden Gate Seminary. So we
Okay.
took a trip out there to see the friend, and I took our 2-year-old daughter with us. And as I was swinging her in the swing on the campus of Golden Gate Seminary, looking out across the San Francisco Bay, I just felt God say, "You're missing it. You're not where I want you to be. You're still trying to figure this out." And I was the most active volunteer in the church that I could be. I taught Sunday school. I did some business stuff for the church. I mean, I just was doing whatever God asked me to do within the church, but he just basically said, "You missed it." And the next 18 months just really struggled through that about, what you want me to do, God. And finally came to that point where I said, "Okay, God, wherever you want me to do, that's fine." And my big hang up was being a foreign missionary. I
Mhm.
didn't want to go overseas and be a missionary. I'd never been overseas. I didn't like foreign food, just all kinds of hang ups. And finally I said, "God, I'll even go overseas if you want." As if God started laughing at me, saying, "You'd never fit overseas anyway, but I need your heart." So, you know, and that's kind of God and I's quirky, sarcastic relationship.
Yeah.
I'll struggle with something, and finally, when I give in, he laughs at me, and we just go on down the road together.
Awesome.
So following that, I became bivocational as a minister of education, and eventually full time, and got out of the farming business and um, into ministry, and
So
then from there.
in bivocational, let's touch on that real quick. What were you, a farmer and a pastor then, or a minister?
I was a minister of education and a farmer
Okay.
for about 2 years.
All right.
And during that time, I think we get to that later on, but during that time, really got my feet wet in lots of areas of ministry. I had
Mhm.
pastor was Charlie Westbrook, which you're a familiar name with that.
I
So,
am. Yep.
and he just kind of kept putting responsibility out there, saying, "Hey, can you go do this? Can you go do that?" And I'd say, "Yeah, sure," and just kind of took it from there. So
Yep.
it was interesting.
Yeah, Charlie. So I have shared in a previous episode about an interim pastor that kind of helped me find my mentor, and it was Charlie Westbrook. So I am very familiar with Charlie. Yes,
Yeah,
for multiple reasons, but that's actually the main one in my life.
yeah.
How did so that's where you started Minister of Education in our area, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did it grow from there to kind of even spreading out into the community?
Just God's leadership, basically. Doing Being involved in situations where God planted me. Most of them I were very uncomfortable with, and transitioned to meeting people and doing things. Hospital visits. Charlie
Mhm.
got me making hospital visits early on. I think he didn't like to, and so it was easy for him to have me go to them. But I remember my first visit to Barnes Hospital. He wanted me to go and visit a pre-surgery patient, and he was a nice old guy, and I kind of knew his name and face from seeing him around church, but I didn't know him well. And go to Barnes Hospital and kind of make my way to where I was supposed to be and talk to this guy and pray with him, and came home, and then kind of got more acclimated to, hospital visits, and in one sense, greater chaplaincy, meeting people in the hospital that just didn't have any clergy, and kind of filling that void, and it came natural. That's just God's giftedness, and then being willing to follow God and do bloom where He plants us. Use our gifts and skills as He's equipped and gifted us, and keep going from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what would be two or three things that someone in ministry could do to connect to their community and better engage with it? Are you comfortable sharing some of the places that you're currently engaging our community? Like, because I think that's even
Sure.
maybe some important things for people to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And let me just back up a little bit,
Yep.
because in starting, I was pretty underengaged in the community. I'm very basically I'm introverted. My
Okay.
wife's gone right now, and Saturday I talked to on the phone twice. That was to her both times. That's the only person I talked to all day. And I
Yeah.
got to 10 o'clock Saturday night, and I'm thinking, this has been a good day. So I'm still pretty introverted, and I like people. God has instilled that love in me. And yet, from the very beginning, it became important just to meet people where they are and talk to them, and just follow God's leadership in conversations. And I know that sounds kind of wonky, but I did a lot with children's ministries to start as minister of education. We had a bus ministry.
Okay.
Go out and visit, knock on doors, meet people from different walks of life. And uh, the first few times, it was kind of hard to engage people. And I remember some conversations when people just open up.
Yeah.
I want to just give your kid a piece of candy and pick them up on the bus tomorrow. And they began to open up and tell me their life story. And I just found that at first kind of bizarre. And at second thought, they're so needy, they'll talk to anybody.
Mm.
This is what Jesus had in mind as He, preached and taught in the Gospels. That's the pictures we get. He engaged people where they were. And so just kind of follow that role model, and then transitioned into more and more. And right now I do hospice chaplaincy through the health department. And a lot of folks that I visit have no clergy in the area. They don't have a pastor. And so that's a niche that keeps me, as I say, in real ministry. You know, we can go to church and we get kind of cocooned with church people, surrounded by that, and real life's out there, and it's not pretty some days. And then Been on the school board, and so I get to see a different group of people through the eyes of school. Some, uh, success stories, and some not very successful, and yet we're here to serve our community as a school district. So that's a natural transition. And then just as I go through my day, just knowing different people in the community, and uh, sometimes God just puts someone on my mind and says, "You need to get to know that person," and so I'll make a contact, and God will take it from there.
Yeah, I think there's something really key to being faithful with the places that, like, a door opens and you're like, okay, I'll walk through, I guess. And then you're just
Hmm.
faithful into that space. And then all of a sudden another door opens that you weren't even thinking about because you were faithful in that space. And so there's something to that. And I think that was a good thing to bring out there. It's probably where you've landed in some of those spaces that you're in currently because you were faithful, and so now people are trusting you with the hospice and the school board and things like that because of that faithfulness. I can tell you, as an area pastor, I know you take care of our area pastors as well, and I would say that that comes with a faithfulness as well. So I appreciate that. All right. So what would be two or three things, just a couple things that people could do to connect to their local community? I know one could be just being faithful. If a space opens up, walk through the door. But do you have anything else for us with that area?
I think one of the basic things is when you meet people, gas station, Walmart, restaurants, just going through your daily routine, uh, engage people.
Mm,
Just hi, how you doing? Those surface questions, which I don't really like the how you doing question because we get the usual answer of it's great, but then I'll get an answer
yeah.
fairly frequently of man, it's an awful day,
Mm,
and that's the opening to follow up on.
okay.
And so I have to discipline myself to not be too busy to pause and say, man, I'm sorry to hear that. And if it's not a good time for either one of us to talk, say a prayer for them
Okay.
right there in Walmart. Just aisle five, pray for the person. And it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And that's, again, a picture I have of Jesus, what he did as he walked through his communities and engaging people like that. And then be aware of what's going on in the community. If there's been a crisis in someone's life that makes the news buzz, be aware that if I see a family member or that person, to engage them or to offer to engage them. Many times I'll meet a grieving family or a grieving family member, and I'll say, if you ever want to talk, get a hold of me, and not trying to pressure them, but just offer that listening ear because, I've been through some grief in my life and people around the area know that. So I'm available.
Mm, those are good. Those are good. All right. So we are both in a rural community, smaller towns. So give us some key insights about how smaller towns work.
They work very well. Uh, Small towns are relational.
Mhm.
And it's not just because a lot of people related, they relate to each other on levels of children's events, family events, community events, and all those are important in the rural area. Every little small town has its festivals that follow the calendar. Every little town, small town has a Christmas event.
Mhm.
Some will have a parade, some will have free hot chocolate, but they always have a big deal over a weekend where there's shopping in the downtown area. And folks from a metro area would think how quaint, but there's nothing downtown to buy except insurance and go to your bank. So, it's just that. But they have a calendar of events. And in the summer, there's farmers markets. And, it's just being aware of those and participating. Just go downtown and walk around. There again, it's not rocket science, just be visible. They have that. Small towns are often known as cliquish. And up to a point that might be a little true, but it's a clique that is very open.
Yep.
And people in small towns are pretty genuine most of the time. What you see is what you get. And so if you're, quote, the outsider, they're very open to getting to know you, but they just want you to be real with them. If
Yeah.
you're from Metro St. Louis and you move to Fayette County, Illinois, it's culture shock. You know, you can't go to Schnucks and get the variety of spices that you can get. In
Yep.
small town Vandalia, there's just we have limited access to many things, and yet we're not stupid. We
Yep.
love food, and we're going to cook it, and it's just be genuine once again. When you come to the small town, we're lacking some things, but we're not lacking in relationships. We're going to care about you. And the third thing is, in small towns, community events are centered around school events many times.
Mhm.
High school sports are community gatherings, not sporting events.
Yes.
We love our kids. They're our kids. Whether we win or lose, they're still our kids. And, in Vandalia, we've had a couple sports be very successful for a longer term. And I remember that's in recent Vandalia history.
Hmm.
So, as far as sports, and yet people gather at those sporting events just to cheer the kids on, win or lose. And
Oh yeah.
so, yeah, we had a new pastor move to town decades ago, and I was at a high school football game, and I was in my 20s, and he and his cohort were making fun of our little small town football team because they weren't playing very well
Hmm.
in the stands. And I thought, no, not cool, not cool. He didn't stay in town very long. He moved on.
Yep.
But I just scripture pops into my head. Don't think too highly of yourself. It's just, we're all here to live life. So
That's what.
in small towns, we're relational. We love each other. If we don't love each other, we're still going to try and figure out a way to get along.
Yeah, I would say that's very true. It's if you're a visible face, if you just so 7 years now, I'm getting to the point where people will recognize me and my wife will go, "Who was that?" I'm like, "I don't know." I go, "I've seen them before. I know they're from here. Like I have an idea of where I even saw them, but I'm not really sure who they are." But I'm becoming that familiar face. I would say that's true. Is if you make yourself visible, people will just naturally get to know you, and you'll become a familiar face in the community. So in a way, you get accepted into the community because you're a familiar face. So I would say that's very, very true. I would also try to remind that pastor that ended up moving on that is your team that you are making fun of. It is not somebody else's team. That is your team.
Right.
It is our town. So
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes it's easy to forget that like you're a traveler passing through, or you grew up somewhere else. But I know when I moved, I know this is more my story, but when I moved into town, one thing that I told Rachel is like we're jumping in with both feet. Like we're gonna be there. We're Vandalians. We're gonna bleed red, even though we actually do bleed red. But we're gonna we're the Vandals, and so
Hmm.
we're gonna get after it. And I think that has been something that has greatly benefited me early on in my tenure here. So. All right. If a pastor is, this might be the same answer, but if a pastor is going to move into a rural area, what would be some questions they should ask of themselves before moving into that type of community or church?
I think the first question, are you ready for small town relationships? And it's not as much the glass house syndrome of everybody knowing your business, but are you just really ready to genuinely live out your faith in community with other people
Hmm.
and be transparent? Yeah, and if you have a bad day with your kids and you yell at them in public, be able to laugh at yourself and say, "Yep, I'm not the best parent ever. I'll never make dad of the year, but it's okay."
Yeah.
Just some of those humility things that we all have to learn. Second thing is you want to live at a slower pace because rural life sometimes is slower paced.
Hmm.
And in church life, where sometimes we want to see our church grow and develop quickly, probably not going to happen. And
I would say there's a lot of hurry up and wait, which probably goes with the agricultural, where
Mhm.
when it comes time to you got to do something, it's got to happen fairly quickly. But
Right,
once it's done, there's a lot of margin.
that's right. That's right. Planting is an intense time,
Yeah.
6, 7 weeks of long hours in making sure your inputs are there on time. Harvest is the same way. It's very intense time, which really fits in the rhythm of the Bible very well
Hmm.
because we gather energy, we pray for the harvest, we pray for workers for the harvest, and then the harvest happens.
Yep.
Very simple. very simple process. And yet, the slower pace of church life sometimes annoys some pastors. And so, if you're not ready for a slower pace where um, you can handle that, then don't come.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to fit into the rhythm of the community, don't come. Agricultural communities, even though farm size gets bigger, there's fewer and fewer farmers, we operate on an agricultural calendar.
Hmm. Yeah,
And so,
I was even going to add that in on the events and stuff. You can't just, if you're coming from a community that isn't rural, and so you've got to think differently. You can't just institute the last event you or the event calendar you did at your last church. You do have
right.
to think about the rhythm of the community and if it fits the event of the calendar. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Right.
agree with that. Yeah,
Well,
that's good stuff there. Um, Anything else? I don't want to move on
well,
just in case there's anything else. All right. So our focuses are to educate those thinking about jumping into ministry, to equip those who are already in, and then to encourage those um, that might be thinking about jumping out. And it could even be they may be thinking about jumping out simply because they've come to the end of their race, and so it may be because they're discouraged, and it may just be they're like, I think I'm just done. But in that, what is one thing that you would want to make sure that new ministry personnel, like if they're thinking about coming into church life, church ministry, what's one thing that you would want them to understand about the church?
one thing I think that we all must understand about the church is God calls us to serve Him by serving the people He created.
Mm,
Ministry must always be God centered and people focused. And that's just the basics. It's kind of like baseball: see the ball, hit the ball. It's not real complicated, but we try and make it complicated sometimes.
mm-hmm.
And so, as I've served the Lord, what God has taught me through my years in ministry and pre-ministry life, just serving as a volunteer in church, when we lose sight of the people that we're to reach, the people we're to serve, we've lost sight of God. Those two can't be dissected. The great commandments hang on each other, they follow each other naturally. If I love God, I'm going to love the people He created. It's just that simple. And not to get preachy, but when Jesus hung on the cross and loved the people that crucified Him, He was setting a model for every minister to say, people aren't going to like you. Jesus said that before He was crucified. There'll come a day when they're not going to like you. Okay. It's not popularity, it's faithful service. And if you're thinking about jumping into ministry, God's call drives me.
Mm,
If I have to revisit my call, which I do fairly often, just to make sure that I'm on the right track, then that's good. I should revisit my call. Lord, am I where you want me? I can't leave ministry. I can't leave this ministry position until God says you're done.
yeah. It's
There's some days I'd like to just, nah, I don't want to do this anymore. But God says, I'm not done with you yet.
yeah.
Some days I need to learn some new lessons. Some days an old dog needs to learn new tricks, and old dogs can learn new tricks. It just takes a little longer.
Yeah.
So it's just that. And then jumping into ministry is faithfulness for the long haul.
Mm,
There's a tendency, whether, and it's not in ministry only, it's in about every area of life. If this job gets too hard, I'll just go find another one.
mhm.
In ministry, we couple that with God's call, and He's trying to teach us to be faithful for the long haul. I sat with a group of pastors this morning, and one of them will uh, achieve 60 years at the same church in October.
Wow.
It's a rural church. He's been a great pastor. He's been faithful. He's done lots of good things in ministry. He's been a community pastor in a rural area north of here, and just very thankful God has placed him in my life. And yet, it's not been easy. There's been lots of ups and downs.
Yeah, I would second that. Um, if you haven't, like, if you're out there listening and you have not experienced the day that you want to quit yet, like the day you experience that, that is not new. Anybody that's done this for any length of time, we have had a day like that, and we've had to figure out how to go to the next day. Yeah. All right, what about equipping? What's one tool that you believe has helped you the most, or what is one tool you wish you would have had, like even in the past?
You're probably going to smirk at my answer.
Okay.
The Bible. I've been to seminary. It was a great experience of learning how to study, learning how to pursue answers in scripture, which taught me how to pursue answers in other areas of literature and writing. I've done lots of attended conferences, and I'm thankful for all those things. They've all added to my ability that God's given me to attract people to churches, to help pastors and church leaders to be more effective in their roles in ministry, whether it's in programming or process or the building of the church or how to have a better Bible school, all those kind of things. It's just not one thing, it's everything. And yet it comes back to so much of the wisdom of the Bible that uh, from what Jesus did in the Gospels, and Old Testament prophets who were always depressed, you know. Part of what I do now is encourage pastors and church leaders over 7 counties in Southern Baptist life. And I share with them frequently, read Elijah, read Jeremiah, read Isaiah. Those guys were all depressed, discouraged. They wanted to quit all the time. Oh, Lord, Jezebel and Elijah. It's really humorous. Elijah kills 300 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. 24 hours later, one old lady threatens him and he's off into the middle of the desert.
Yep.
It's just like us, you know. You can have a great Sunday, and then someone on the way out of church says, the toilet wasn't flushed. You're like, oh, not again.
It's always something like that too. Yep.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the encouragement side, because you do interact with pastors that do need encouragement, what is something that you feel like the pastors who are getting on the verge of discouragement, maybe what do you come across a common reason that they're getting discouraged, and then what is what do you tell them that tends to be the encouraging piece that helps them keep going?
I think the basic reason, when you boil it all down at the end of the day, is that in our society, in our culture today, the negativity and ability to criticize people in all walks of life is getting greater and greater.
Mhm.
Uh, we have passed the age where, whether it's a school principal or a police officer or a pastor garnered respect in the past, not so today. We're all not as trustworthy as we were. And that hurts. That hurts our ability to work and reason. And I think as I talk to pastors, that discouragement comes basically from lack of respect and fellowship in the church. And we're not asking people to do anything that God doesn't ask them to do, but they just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And bottom line, and you see attendance declining in churches pretty much all over, and spiritual apathy everywhere, and it just wears pastors down. And the
I,
encouragement comes that try and give is just from the Lord. You know, listen intently. Don't try and talk them out of discouragement, because I can't do that. But yet redirect them to people like Elijah, people like Isaiah in the scripture, and Jesus, and some of his encounters with Peter, where Peter was so impetuous with his mouth, he could just go off on the wrong tangent and Jesus would have to reel him in,
yeah. Yep.
So just those type of things, and always pray with people and pray for them. The
Yeah.
greatest thing I do is pray for people.
I've said this before. It's critical. Yep.
Yeah.
It's critical. So who have been some of the mentors and influencers in your life?
Charlie Westbrook, as I mentioned earlier, got me started in ministry, challenged me, taught me, mentored me along, listened to me. Another good friend of mine, Jerry Day, was just about a year ahead of me on the going into ministry track in midlife, and we have stayed in touch throughout our lives, and challenged each other at times, and just listened to each other at other times, and uh, has been a very good relationship there. So probably those two have been the most impactful. and lots of reading.
Okay. Who are some, what, do you have a couple books that you just tend to give out to people, or who are some of your favorite authors or books to just read? Maybe a book that you've read multiple times.
Uh, Read Experiencing God multiple times.
Hmm.
Encourage people to do that. Purpose Driven Life.
Hmm.
I've enjoyed that book. Went through it several times just for my own personal renewal. And then another book that I give out a lot is Total Forgiveness by R.T. Kendall.
Okay.
I find a lot of pastors, a lot of Christians uh, have surface forgiveness. We can't really forgive. And that's at the root of many of our I want to quit ministry, and it bleeds over into our home life. It just it's a critical issue.
Mm. All right.
And
I haven't read that one, so I'm gonna have to get that one. Yeah. Okay. Um, where can people find you if this has triggered something that and they just want to reach out? And it could be another associational person that's interacting with pastors. It's just like, hey, how do you have these type of conversations? It could be another pastor that just needs encouragement. Where can they find you to kind of reach out and just continue the conversation if that's something that they desire?
well, I can give my phone number. That's the easiest way.
Don't do it on this podcast. You are on Facebook, so they could look
I'm
you up
on
on Facebook.
Facebook,
Yeah.
Rehoboth Baptist Association. If you can ever spell Rehoboth, you can find me.
Well, I'll connect it. I'll connect it to that association so they
Yeah.
can find you.
And my alternate office is Denny's in Vandalia. So
uh, people would probably think that's mine too. I'm there a
yeah,
lot as well. So yeah,
small towns
yeah,
congregate at area restaurants. So
yeah.
yeah,
I will say, I was gonna say this earlier when you were talking about like, we know how to cook stuff here. Our per capita restaurants per population has got to be one of the highest in Illinois. Like we have so many restaurants here. So
right.
that's it is enjoyable, like, and we've got all the flavors. Like we got Mexican, we got Thai, we got Chinese, we got
Mhm.
upscale like fancy stuff, we've got Denny's, like we got fast food, we got it all. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's nice. All right. Is there anything else that you just wanted to kind of enter time with? I wanted to kind of give you the floor, see if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
No, not really. I
All
just
right.
appreciate the opportunity to share and encourage people, and that's it.
All right. Well, I appreciate having you on, Joe.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. See you later.
All right.
So many good things from Joe. So many good things. I hope you heard two specific things, and I'm going to say about rural communities, but I think it's probably just about any community that you would interact with. Number one, did you catch how often he talked about how important relationships are? Like moving with the rhythm of the community, getting to know the people, what is the community experiencing, and then engaging it. Like he talked about that so many times in different ways. And the second thing kind of goes with that is it's simple. Like don't overcomplicate connecting with your community. It's pretty simple. Find out, like, see where there might be an open door, walk through it, be faithful in that space, and then if God should open up other doors, walk through them, be faithful, continue to just love people like Jesus would love them. It's pretty simple. It doesn't make it easy. It's not easy, but it is simple. So I really appreciate Joe. Glad that he was willing to share with us today. Hope you gleaned some from it, and please feel free to reach out. Like he has time for you. He will spend time encouraging you and try to equip you and help you take that next step that you may need in your own ministry. So reach out if that's something that you would want to do. Thank you so much for checking this episode out. I hope that you found some education that helped you take a step. I hope that you got some equipping to kind of help you understand life in ministry, maybe something that you need to adjust within your own context. And then I hope you were encouraged. I hope that you heard ministry can be hard, but you can keep going. And there are people that have traveled that path in front of you, and they care about you traveling the path behind them. And so be encouraged with that too. You do me a huge favor, like, subscribe, write a review, do all those things. It really does help me out. It does help this podcast out, make it more visible. So if you do those things, we would appreciate it here in this episode. We will see you next time. Got some more interviews coming up, and so looking forward to those. Make sure you're checking that out, and I will see you then.